Hello and welcome back to HEMAFightBreakdowns. Today I want to talk about the defensive Zwerchhau. Specifically, Zwerchhau is a Master Strike, and like many other Master Strikes like Shield-Hau, it is designed to defeat common fencing. I think that's the broadest definition you can give a Master Strike. And the reason, at least for most Master Strikes, that they are so good at dealing with common fencing, or I guess you could just say instinctual fencing, is that it both defends and attacks at the same time by closing off a line. And it's a pretty simple concept, but it can be very complicated when you're dealing with the many different ways that people can attack. The Shield-Hau does this very easily by just crossing the body line, using the hilt of the sword to kind of get in the way of your opponent's attack while delivering a cut at the same time. But the Zwerchhau is not so simple. The Zwerchhau is generally only used for attacking, and that's for very good reason. It's got a very interesting range. It's kind of shorter range than an Oberhau, but it can still be pretty long. It can also be very, very short. It can be thrown very quickly and very awkwardly at different angles to make sure that it's difficult to block. And most importantly, after you land with a Zwerchhau, it can be pretty easy to just push your hands up a little bit and end up in a hanging parry that can keep you safe. But one thing that appears in the texts a lot is that they'll tell you to attack with a Zwerchhau into an Oberhau, and a lot of times that just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. It's difficult to defend yourself with a Zwerchhau in that particular way because it crosses at a very awkward angle, and unless somebody is just really laser focused on your head, it's pretty easy for them to just lower their point of contact a little bit towards your hands and just pop you right in the wrist as you're trying to Zwerch the air. But there is one application of Zwerchhau that I think does exist in manuals and can be very applicable, and that is throwing a Zwerch as a feint to simply end up in a hanging parry, which is what we're going to see in this little sparring session. Now, with that little exchange, what it is there is to pay attention to is, one, unlike the texts, this is a left Zwerchhau thrown, not a right Zwerchhau, as you'll see in Lichtenauer. But specifically, it is not really thrown at any particular target. But despite the fact that it's not an inherent threat in and of itself, it is still threatening because, again, a Zwerchhau is a little bit of a mid-range technique. But there is a problem that you see a lot when two newer fencers are going at each other, which is that they're trying to Oberhau or Zorn each other, and neither of them are being successful because they're both just putting, more and more and more pressure onto the blade. What this sort of allows you to do is threaten pressure into a very different area. So if you go back a little bit and you imagine that these two people were just going to throw at each other from, just two Oberhaus, it would be entirely likely that they'd end up far too close. If you watch this person over here on the left, you can see that they're really throwing up more of a parry for what they expect is going to be an Oberhau. But if you look right here, you can see that they were more than close enough to hit their opponent. It's just that they expected something different. If both of these people threw an Oberhau, either they would both get hit or they would both miss and they'd end up in a grapple. But instead of that, this person throws this Zwerchhau that's a little bit low into the left side, which gets right in the way of both an Oberhau and this attempted parry. And what it accomplishes is it puts him in a very, very advantageous position. One, because despite the fact that this person now theoretically has an overbind, they're on the wrong side of the body to push down. So if you imagine from here, even if they were the strongest person in the world and they pushed right down, they couldn't get a meaningful cut over here, even if they managed to shove this hanging parry, what it is now, out of the way. And if they push too far low over here, well, again, they have no real target. They're so close, they can't really meaningfully pull their sword back to get a thrust anymore. So they have to pull away and throw another proper cut. And the second that situation arises, this person on the right who has their Zwerchhau down there can simply do, well, exactly what they do, which is just throw that other Zwerchhau onto the other side. They have an extreme advantage in that, specifically because they're on the underside of this person's blade. Zwerchhaus that come from underneath have huge advantages because they are able to not just get in under people's guards, but it helps get in under any sort of countercut that might be coming. So if this person on the left just pulled their hands up and tried to come right back down, well, they'd find that this crossguard was still here defending the upper openings of this attacker, and they wouldn't have anywhere to go. They'd have to pull off and then come all the way around and hit low in order to get any sort of available target. In the meantime, this Zwerchhau, which is very fast and very efficient, could pretty easily just come back around to the side. But I want to talk a little bit more about this opening action. And it's something that you don't see a lot of people do, because stepping into a hanging parry and throwing a fake Zwerchhau are two very different things. When you simply step forward and put up a hanging parry, you're basically just telling your opponent, I'm blocking. And whenever you tell someone that you are just going to block, you are there to block and you are there to counter whatever comes at them, it is on them to throw the wackiest, weirdest, most nonsense attack they possibly can. Because the one thing they do not want to do is touch your guard. If you step forward with a hanging parry, the one thing your opponent should be doing is trying as hard as they can to hit literally anything but the sword that you have placed there. Because when you walk forward in a hanging parry, you're not threatening. You're just trying to bait someone into throwing an attack. But when you throw a Zwerchhau coming forward and end up in a hanging parry, the situation is different. The threat of that Zwerchhau, even if it maybe looks like it wouldn't have the proper range, is going to get people to far more likely, well, it's going to increase the likelihood that they're going to throw that instinctual just Oberhau right over the top, which again will play right into your hands, but also increases the likelihood that they're just going to try to pull their hands down and parry. So if you want to imagine this person on the left here just pulled their hands down into a plow and tried to parry this Zwerchhau, well, they'd still be just as vulnerable to this follow-up, if not more so. Because when you parry down low right, which is what they would have had to do with their plow, well, now they have to go all the way up to this top left in order to defend their other opening. So if anything, that defensive measure would have played even more into the hands of this attack. And I think another potential thing that comes very well from throwing a Zwerchhau out of range is that if you don't overcommit to it, the worst thing that happens to you is that you end up in Ox. And the texts talk about this a lot, where there's theoretically a Master Strike to be thrown, or at least some kind of changer to be thrown between any two guards using any two cuts. It's some of those are clearly far more feasible than others. But this is one that I think is a little underutilized and is still very feasible. If you throw a Zwerchhau that essentially changes your Vom Tog into a right Ox, or I guess you could theoretically call it a left plow into a right Ox, you are doing two things. You are defending yourself while walking forward with this hanging parry. You are presenting an attack that someone theoretically has to defend, otherwise they're going to get tapped right in the hands. And then when they parry or attack, you have both of those lines closed off, and you have a very, very nice and efficient follow-up. So this is a play that I'm going to be practicing a little bit more myself because it actually looks very effective. But it's something that I think a lot of people were maybe taught early on in their HEMA career, but never used because they were obsessed with doing what the book told them, which was throw that right Zwerchhau. And I just think that this left Zwerchhau version is significantly easier to do. And maybe if more people do this left version, they'll start doing the right version as well. That's going to be it for today. If you'd like to see your own footage featured on the channel, feel free to send an email at HEMAFightBreakdowns@gmail.com, and I hope to see you next time.